in the quiet suburb of Pine Grove, where the wild meets the civilized, an unspoken balance exists. But when the laws of nature are challenged, survival becomes a desperate game. Lily Thompson had always been a caretaker, a silent guardian to the stray souls who wandered to the edges of her home, but nothing could prepare her for Daisy, a pregnant bobcat, who seemed to trust her a fragile life, carrying more than just her own survival on her shoulders. But just as nature can be kind, it can be cruel. A silent predator lurked in the shadows of the pines, a creature foreign to these lands, yet more at home in the art of ambush. When fate collided on one fateful afternoon, it was no longer about territory or instinct. It was about life or death. Would the wild claim its own, or would an unexpected alliance shift the course of nature itself? This is a story of survival, courage, and the undeniable bond between the untamed and the human heart. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Pine Grove, a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Jacksonville, Florida. The area was known for its dense pine forests that bordered the carefully manicured lawns, creating a unique blend of wilderness and civilization. It was here that Lily Thompson, a 42-year-old hospice nurse, had made her home for the past decade. Lily's modest ranch-style house with its wraparound porch and carefully tended garden had become something of a sanctuary for the local wildlife. Her colleagues often joke that she ran an unofficial animal welfare center from her backyard every morning. Before her shift at St. Vincent's Hospital, she would leave out fresh water and carefully portioned food for the neighborhood strays, both feline and canine, that had come to rely on her kindness. It was during one of these morning routines in early March that Lily first noticed the pregnant bobcat. Unlike the usual strays, this one had a distinctive grace about her, moving with the quiet confidence of a wild creature that had somehow found itself drawn to the edges of human habitation. The bobcat's tawny fur was marked with beautiful black spots, and despite her swollen belly, she maintained an athletic build that spoke of her predatory nature. Lily, with her years of experience handling strays, knew better than to approach the wild animal directly. Instead, she began leaving out fresh water and small portions of raw chicken at the edge of her property, where the suburban landscape merged with the pine forest. She named the bobcat Daisy, after the wildflowers that grew in abundance around her property. "You're welcome here, sweet girl," Lily would whisper from her porch, watching as Daisy cautiously approached the offerings each morning. "Just keep your distance and we'll get along just fine." Across the street lived Luke Martinez, a 45-year-old former military pilot who had retreated into a self-imposed isolation following the loss of his son James in a car accident. 2 years ago, the tragedy had not only claimed his only child, but had also led to the dissolution of his marriage. Now, Luke's only companion was Max, a 4-year-old German shepherd who had been James's beloved pet. Luke's property, unlike Lily's well-tended garden, showed signs of neglect. The grass had grown somewhat wild, and the flowers that his ex-wife had planted were now overcome by weeds. He spent most of his days inside working remotely as a flight simulator instructor for a private aviation company. The only times he ventured out were for Max's walks, which he took at odd hours to avoid running into neighbors. From his home office window, Luke had observed Lily's morning ritual with mild curiosity. He noticed the bobcat, too, but unlike his neighbor's concerned interest, he viewed the wild animal's presence with military pragmatism, another potential problem in an already complicated world. "Keep your distance, Max," he would warn his dog whenever they spotted Daisy during their pre-dawn walks. Max, despite his training and natural curiosity, seemed to understand the gravity in his master's voice and would obediently stay close. As March progressed, Lily noticed subtle changes in Daisy's behavior. The Bobby C cap began appearing more frequently, sometimes twice or 3 times a day, and would often rest in the shade of the large pine trees that bordered Lily's property. Her movements had become more labored, and Lily suspected the birth was approaching. She's choosing to stay close. Lily mentioned to Sarah, her colleague at the hospital, during their lunch break. I'm worried about her. Wild animals usually avoid human contact, especially when they're about to give birth. Maybe she senses that you're safe. Sarah suggested, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. Animals have good instincts about these things. What neither Lily nor Daisy could have anticipated was the other presence that had been drawn to the area, a massive Burmese python that had likely escaped or been released by an irresponsible exotic pet owner. These invasive snakes had become an increasing problem in Florida. Though they were rarely seen this far north, the python had been surviving in the pine forest, growing to an impressive length of nearly 15 feet. It had been sustaining itself on the local wildlife, and Daisy's regular appearances had not gone unnoticed by the opportunistic predator. The attack came on a warm Saturday afternoon. In late March, Lily had just returned from her morning shift and was about to check on Daisy's feeding station when she heard an unusual commotion from the edge of her property. The sound was unlike anything she'd heard before, a mix of desperate yows and the rustle of underbrush. What she saw when she rounded the corner of her house made her blood run cold. The massive python had somehow managed to ambush Daisy, its powerful coils wrapped around the bobcat's body. Daisy was fighting desperately, but her pregnant condition had made her vulnerable, and the python's grip was relentless. "Oh, God, no!" Lily's cry pierced the quiet afternoon air. She looked around frantically for something, anything she could use to help, but the sight of the massive snake had frozen her in place. Her medical training, which had prepared her for all manner of human emergencies, seemed useless in the face of this wild confrontation. Across the street, Max's acute hearing picked up both Lily's cry and the sounds of the struggle. The German shepherd's aggressive barking drew Luke away from his computer screen, where he'd been reviewing flight patterns with a student. "I'm sorry, I need to check something," Luke told his student, hurriedly muting his microphone. Max's barking had taken on an urgency he'd never heard before, and years of military training had taught him to trust in animals' instincts. Luke was about to investigate when his phone rang. It was Lily's number. They'd exchanged contact information months ago during a neighborhood watch meeting, though they'd barely spoken since. "Luke, please, I need help." Lily's voice was trembling. "There's a python attacking a bobcat in my yard. I don't know what to do." The urgency in her voice triggered something in Luke, the same instinct that had served him well during his military service. Without hesitation, he grabbed his work gloves from the garage and rushed across the street. Max following closely at his heels. The scene that greeted them was chaos. The python had tightened its grip on Daisy, who was still fighting, but showing signs of exhaustion. Lily stood a few feet away, tears streaming down her face as she watched helplessly. Luke's military training kicked in. Immediately, he assessed the situation with the same clarity he'd used during combat missions. The python's head was visible, and its attention was focused entirely on subduing Daisy. This was their advantage. "Max, stay," Luke commanded sharply, and the German shepherd immediately held his position. Though his body remained tense and ready, Luke quickly scanned the ground and spotted a fallen pine branch about 4 feet long, sturdy enough to serve as a lever. "Lily, I need you to be ready," Luke called out, his voice steady and authoritative. "When I give the signal, you'll need to pull the bobcat free. Can you do that?" Lily nodded, wiping tears from her face. Despite her fear, she moved closer, ready to act. Luke approached the entangled animals carefully, branch in hand. "Max, bark," he commanded, and the German shepherd immediately began a series of sharp, aggressive barks that caught the python's attention. The snake's head turned slightly toward the new thread, its coils loosening fractionally. That was all Luke needed in one swift motion. He wedged the branch between the python's coils and Daisy's body, using it as a lever to create space. Now Lily darted forward and grabbed Daisy's front legs, pulling with all her strength. The pregnant bobcat, sensing the opportunity, used her remaining energy to ride free of the python's loosened grip. As soon as Daisy was clear, Luke dropped the branch and backed away, quickly calling Max to his side. The python, realizing its prey had escaped, began to retreat into the underbrush. Luke and Lily watched as the massive snake disappeared into the pine forest, their hearts racing from the encounter. Daisy had collapsed a few feet away, her breathing labored but steady. Despite the ordeal, she made no attempt to flee, perhaps too exhausted, or recognizing that these humans had helped her. She needs help. Lily said, her nurse's instincts taking over. As she examined Daisy from a safe distance, the python may have injured her, and she's so close to giving birth. Luke surprised himself by speaking up. My garage is empty and climate-controlled. We could set up a safe space for her there. The words came out before he could really think about what he was offering, but seeing Lily's grateful smile made him realize he didn't want to take them back. What followed was a carefully orchestrated rescue operation. Luke retrieved a large dog crate from his garage, while Lily called a local wildlife veterinarian. She knew through the hospital together. They managed to guide the exhausted bobcat into the crate, using gentle movements and soft voices. Dr. Maria Rodriguez, the wildlife vet, arrived within the hour after a careful examination. She confirmed that while Daisy was bruised and exhausted, there were no serious injuries. However, the stress of the attack had triggered early labor. She's going to give birth. Very soon, Dr. Rodriguez announced, moving her to a wildlife center now would be too risky. The best thing we can do is provide a quiet, safe space and monitor her progress. Luke's garage was transformed into a makeshift maternity ward. They created a separate area using privacy screens equipped with soft blankets and a shallow water dish. Dr. Rodriguez showed them how to monitor Daisy's condition from a safe distance using a baby monitor. With a camera that evening as they waited for signs of labor, Luke and Lily sat on his front porch, watching the sun set over the pine forest. Max lay at their feet, alert but relaxed. I haven't used that military training in years, Luke said quietly, breaking the comfortable side. Ence never thought I'd need it in suburban Florida. Lily turned to look at him, really seeing him for the first time. The lines of grief on his face seemed softer in the evening light. I'm glad you were here, she said simply. I couldn't have helped her alone. Luke nodded, then surprised himself by continuing. After James died after the divorce, I thought keeping to myself was easier, safer. He patted Max's head absently. James loved this dog so much. Sometimes it's hard to even look at Max without seeing my son's face. Lily's hand found his arm squeezing. Gently, grief has a way of making us build walls, she said softly, but sometimes life finds ways to break them down. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from the baby monitor. Daisy had begun to show signs of active labor. The next 12 hours were intense, but amazing under Dr. Rodriguez's guidance. They watched via the monitor as Daisy gave birth to 5 tiny bobcat kittens. Each arrival was celebrated quietly from the safety of Luke's living room, where they had set up a monitoring station, 5 little fighters. Dr. Rodriguez announced proudly after the last kitten was born. Mom and babies all look healthy, but the next 48 hours will be crucial. Those 48 hours turned into weeks as Lily and Luke worked together to care for their unusual guests. They developed a routine. Lily would check on the family before and after her hospital shifts while Luke monitored them during the day. Between his flight simulation classes, Max proved to be an excellent guardian. His presence, somehow reassuring to Daisy, rather than threatening the garage, became a meeting point for them, where they would quietly observe the growing family and talk. Luke found himself sharing stories about James, happy memories he had locked away in his grief. Lily spoke about her own loss, her mother's long battle with cancer that had inspired her to become a hospice nurse. The bobcat kittens grew quickly, their spots becoming more distinct. As they began to explore their enclosed world, each developed a unique personality. The boldest one they nicknamed Scout, who was always the first to try new things. The smallest they called Pip, who made up for his size with determination. Two sisters they named Luna and Star, for their tendency to be most active at night. And finally, the most cautious one they called Sage, who seemed to think carefully before every move. As the kittens grew stronger, Dr. Rodriguez began preparing for their eventual release. "They're wild animals," she reminded Luke and Lily. "The best thing we can do is ensure they return to their natural habitat."